Hi, good morning. Welcome to the Trade Decorator Festival. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this discussion. The focus of the event will be awareness of mental health and helping break down barriers, removing the stigma attached with mental health and encouraging decorators to speak up and be heard. The event will be a discussion talking about how to deal with the stresses of running a business and how to avoid the pitfalls that cause stress. Before we get started, I'd just like to say that we really welcome your contribution with comments and questions for this session. If you have a specific question you'd like to ask, if you could hit the Ask a Question tab to help me keep track of the conversation. If you'd like to come up on the screen, please give me a wave in the comments bar and you can come and talk to us. If you're watching live on Facebook, it's not too late to join us by clicking on the link so that you can participate in the live discussion. So firstly, I'd like to say a big welcome to Runa Udin from Mind, the mental health charity. Runa, can you tell us a little bit about Mind?
Well, hello, Paula, and thank you for having me on this event today, to be honest. Mind is basically a national charity for mental health. And honestly, we get involved in a lot of projects, but ultimately our end game is that we want everyone who might be struggling with mental health in any way, shape or form to get the support and respect that they deserve. You know, the end game being everyone has the choice to be able to say, do you know what, I don't feel okay with this, but that's okay. I know I will be supported in one way. I don't have to feel like I'm going to be penalized. So in a nutshell, that is basically what Mind is. But of course, we have loads of funded projects. We, in my department, workplace wellbeing, we deliver training, we have a benchmarking tool, etc. It's a massive organization. You need to visit our website.
Fantastic. Maybe you can put that link to the website in the comments later for us as well. So I can see that there are people watching over on Facebook as well. I'd like to start by asking you what you think, if you're listening to the session, what you think are the things that cause you stress in your business. So if you'd like to start by typing those things into the comments bar, and we'll come back to them in a little while. Mind were recently involved in a study of mental health in construction trades with Ironmongery Direct. This report revealed the scale of the problem, the most common causes of stress, the impact it has on tradespeople's lives, and crucially, what you can do if it affects you. Okay, so I'd like to start by sharing this graph with you, which shares the most common causes of stress that were identified. So I'll just share this on the screen. So as you can see, the top 10 causes of stress in tradespeople were identified as follows. 38% of stress was caused by finances, the top cause. I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise to a lot of you. Tensions with customers came in second at 31%. Tensions with suppliers at 29%. High workload, 26%. Tensions with business partners, 26%. Job security, 21%. Doing the best for the customer, 12%. Making mistakes, 11%. Abuse from customers, 6%, and lack of work, 5%. So I'll just stop sharing that for a minute. So how do we start to address this then? One of the most positive ways to begin addressing mental health issues is to open up and talk to somebody about what you're going through, no matter how difficult that may be. So let's talk about some of the findings in the report. More than 2 in 5 tradespeople, that was 42%, have spoken to friends or family about the problems, which is encouraging to see. However, overall, more than a quarter, it was about 29%, say they don't feel comfortable talking about their mental health with others. This is more of a problem amongst men, with nearly a third, that's about 32% of those surveys, said they found it difficult to discuss what they were feeling, compared to a quarter of women. It's also something that younger tradespeople in particular struggle with. sadly, over half, it was about 52% of workers aged between 18 and 24 say they wouldn't speak to anyone about their mental health. Vicky Mathis says, a great graphic. I've seen decorators experience most of these over the years. High workload and a demand seems a very big one currently. Yeah, I mean, what would you say about that, Runa?
I mean, honestly, like, I'm not surprised that these things cause people to struggle and increase that stress level. The reality is that when we have too much on our plate and things are coming at us from all over angles and we're having to deal with it all the time without respite, without relief, then this is where we end up in that burnout section. And when we are burning out and we still don't have the capacity to be able to look after ourselves, don't find any opportunity to do so, then yeah, it's understandable that that's where people become more vulnerable to developing things like depression or an anxiety disorder. So yeah, that really resonates, in fact, and I would say probably exacerbated by the fact that we had the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say about the pandemic, it's obviously had a massive impact on people's mental health. Can you tell us a little about people's mental health and how it was affected by the pandemic and how you think people have been impacted?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, you've got to understand that before the pandemic, life happened, like you've just shown these stats. But during the pandemic, there was a massive impact in terms of our physical health, our mental health, our social health, and our financial health. And they all kind of interlinked, to be honest. Now, I'm not going to take away from the fact that for some people, they've really thrived. They really did. It was a time to reset. It was a time to, think about what was important to them. But predominantly in our study where we did, when we wanted to measure the impact, and this was late 2020, we found that 60% of adults said that they were struggling with mental health problems or struggling with their mental health in some way. So this could have been because of the isolation, lockdown, if you're living by yourself, that had a massive impact. It could be if, for example, just basic things like starting a new family, you need people around you and that support, but there was none of that really because you're all in lockdown. Bereavement was a massive thing that people really struggled with because, loss of loved ones, but not even being able to have that proper burial or that proper funeral, And then, of course, like just touching on the finance thing, interested that that's the highest level. People have lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods, and actually that hasn't massively improved, to be fair. Some people are still struggling. All the things that they've put in place, it's degraded over the 2 years, building up their businesses, the safety and the social distancing, there's all that to kind of think about. To be honest, if we were to unpack it, there's quite a lot to unpack here, really.
Yeah, I mean, I read out some of the stats a little earlier about why people might struggle with their mental health. Why do you think, about why people might struggle to talk about their mental health? Why do you think it's a struggle for people?
Well, generally, there's the taboo. It's much easier to be able to say, do you know what, I'm suffering from, or I'm living with diabetes, or, a broken leg, or physical health conditions. But for some unknown reason, there's no unwritten about it. People don't feel okay because they feel like they're going to be judged. There's going to be discrimination. We know that, and even today, through various studies, including the 2020 study that we mentioned, that people still feel that they are treated unfairly when they share that they are struggling with their mental health in some ways. That could be embarrassment, that could be being penalized in some way, not being trusted. But what happened during the pandemic was that we saw this new sort of level of stigma, if you like. People were, even if they recognized the signs that they were not okay, they didn't feel like it was serious enough to do anything about it. So instead of getting help, they would just sit there with it. And actually what we saw was that people are more likely to get help when, what could have been early intervention, more at crisis level. It's like they don't have a choice. That's the point that they're going to go and get help. And that's because, other people have it worse. I don't want to burden the NHS. I'm not deserving of support. So there's all of that coming into play in terms of barriers why people don't talk about it, really.
A comment from Brian Dennett in the group. He said, in the workplace, it's seen as a weakness too, which that's a valid point. It shouldn't be. but that's how people feel, that they'll be perceived as weak.
Yeah. I mean, this is especially relevant when we think about, men not being able to talk. I'm not saying every man, every woman type thing, but men generally struggle to talk about their mental health because it feeds into that toxic masculinity thing that, you're the breadwinner, you have to be strong, you have to be able to kind of cope with it, just get on with it, just get up and go. And what's really sad is that where some people perceive like mental health illness to be like a sign of weakness, it isn't at all. It's an illness. Like, for someone who has lived with depression and anxiety, it's literally a hijacker. It robs you of the skills and abilities to do anything about it. So when someone's telling you, just get up and do it already, you're like, I really want to, but it's almost like there's no connection between your mind and your body. Like, to do it, to even get out of bed, as very basic as it sounds, is like a massive achievement sometimes. So imagine trying to explain that to a group of people who not only not understand what it feels like to experience that, but also think that it's a sign of weakness when it's not. I can see why people don't talk about it.
And what do you think could trigger poor mental health?
To be honest, it could be a number of things. I mean, some of the more common things tend to be things like, for example, if people feel like they have too much pressure on their plate, that kind of takes them up at that stress level, that high, the fight and flight, but you're constantly in that fight or flight. But equally, you might think, oh, I wish I had a life where I had no pressure. And actually, that's also the worst thing you can ask for. You need some pressure in your life to motivate you, to get you out of bed. It's almost like it gives you a purpose. So that's quite a key player in this space. If you've got big changes coming up in your life, they usually trigger poor mental health at the very minimum, like high stress levels. So, and that could be something positive, like getting married, having a child, buying a house, life events. You can't control for them, but when they happen, so things like bereavement, things like I don't know, big family situations to kind of that you struggle to deal with. What if you're experiencing long-term stress? If you're not okay to begin with, then that could actually take you, like I was saying earlier, that if you experienced burnout and you stayed in that space, that's when you become vulnerable to something like burnout, something like depression or an anxiety disorder. If you generally have a mindset where you worry about things and you're constantly worried, and looking at that earlier list that you showed, Paula, these are essentially all worries, aren't they? The finances, if people don't pay on time, the tensions with customers and suppliers, and the high workload, business partners, they're all worries. And if you're constantly juggling that, then, that could be potentially trigger poor mental health in people. Responsibilities, unmanageable workload, which we've kind of already seen, and also the isolation aspect of it. Like, if people are often left alone and they're left to their thoughts. Like, I don't know about you, but like, I have this voice in my mind. I'm pretty sure most people do. And it's not the kindest of voices. And imagine that is the only kind of interaction you have on a day-to-day because you happen to work alone. Enough said.
Brian Dennett's just said it's also worse for self-employed tradesmen that work on their own. You can have too much solitary time to dwell on everything, which I guess is what you were saying about that voice in your head. The only conversation you're having is with yourself. And we can be our own worst critics. It's that voice in your head that can make or break you.
Absolutely. And, when you start to struggle, that voice becomes worse. So it doesn't mean that just because you're listening to a very negative voice that you are unwell. But when you become unwell, that voice does tend to get stronger.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little about stress and how stress levels can affect someone's mental health?
Okay, so the way stress works is that, it's not a mental health condition. It's actually a physiological response. It is literally that. But it's really important to talk about because it will affect your decision making, it will affect your relationships, your mental health, your physical health, and everything in between. So in terms of stress, you've got to think about it in terms of the pressures that you have in your life. Now, technically speaking, like I said earlier, you shouldn't have too little. You need enough pressure to motivate you to get out of bed, have a purpose, etc. But the comfort level is having that sizable amount of pressure, if you like. And in that sizable amount of pressure, you feel engaged with your life, you feel open to opportunities, you feel focused, you feel on top form. This is the place where you need your body to be most of the time. Your adrenaline levels are stable, your cortisol levels are low, you're cracking on with life. But obviously in life, sometimes we will face situations that perhaps our body perceives as quite threatening. Back in the days, it used to be the saber-toothed tiger, and your pressure levels increase and your whole body just wants you, it's all about survival. But the problem with that is that in modern day, you might not have a saber-toothed tiger coming at you, but you've got stressors coming at you left, right, and center. And so what happens is that when your body takes you in that place of stretch, like it's really gearing you up so that you can deal with these stresses, what it does is it takes energy away from other parts of your body to increase that cortisol and increase that adrenaline. And the idea is that once you've dealt with it, you're meant to go back into this space of comfort. Problem is because we continuously get stressors at us that our body interprets as tiger level, we stay there. And this is where the problem comes up, that we stay there, we don't do anything to look after ourselves, like thinking about those little stress reliever things. We're constantly in the go, doing. And before you know it, that energy is depleting and you end up going into strain. Now here, you're still kind of hitting those high levels of performance. You still feel like you are on it, but you're starting to feel a little bit tired now. And, you feel a little bit on edge and you might feel quite irritated, nothing to kind of hold on to. And actually, as you stay there, you then end up in crisis point. This is, like I said, the burnout bit. And when you're in burnout, like we're talking, you might notice yourself feeling really distracted all the time. Like, I just can't seem to focus on anything. I feel distracted. I feel on edge. I can't seem to, I feel quite overwhelmed quite quickly. You might find yourself reacting really impulsively. So, like how small things that you wouldn't even bat an eyelid at, like it's like, what? No ketchup in the house. And you literally just rage and blow. That is quite a common feature when you're in that burnout stage. If you feel like you're losing the point, like you start to feel like there's no point to this, you feel quite demoralized or demotivated, you feel like you're losing your mojo, your personality, then that is a high stress point. And this is what tends to happen. This is how it plans out. So this is also a point where you start to struggle to function. So things like making decisions, you might make those more unwise decisions. You might not look out for those opportunities. You might miss points where someone has implied something, but you've totally missed it because you literally don't have that headspace. So that's how stress kind of pans out, really.
Brian's just said he can relate to all of this. Yeah, I mean, how might somebody recognize that they might not be okay, Runa?
See, this is a tough one because you know what? You really need to put the legwork and start to recognize yourself because, one size doesn't fit all. Generally speaking, if you feel anything similar to what I've just described, and it's not like a one-off day, we all have, like a bad day, but sometimes we might even have a bad week, and that's okay because, things happen in life and, you can deal with it over that. But this is why doctors tend to use 2 to 3 weeks. If within a 2-week period, you've noticed that, like, and it is personal. It might not even be any of the things that I described, but in the 2-week period, if you start to notice that you feel more of the things that I've just described, then I would stop to think about, well, what is happening here, and be curious about it. But other signs that might come up right from the start that chances are most people tend to dismiss are things like, if you start to feel quite panicky, but you don't know why. Because often when we feel quite anxious about something, it's usually because we know, it's a job interview, it's something new, or meeting my, partner's parents for the first time, something, driving test, those kind of things. Once you've dealt with it, it's gone. But suddenly you start to feel quite panicky, or you might feel like you can't switch off and your head's always on the go and you can't seem to relax. If you notice that you just feel tired quite a lot and you haven't done physically, like anything so physically demanding, if you see what I mean. If you start to feel tearful sometimes and that really stresses you out, and it can happen at any time, that could be a sign. I mean, to be honest, like I said, it's when you start to feel like not your usual self is usually the key
An
thing.
indicator.
Yeah.
Big indicator there. So how can we look out for each other?
So, again, it's about paying attention, to be honest. Someone put feeling aggressive and going into self-destruct mode. A lot of people think, just to kind of address that actually, is that people think that anxiety, for example, is just about feeling fearful, feeling really panicky, but sometimes it can manifest as aggression or anger. So just kind of want to put that out there based on that comment that we've just seen. But in terms of looking out, if you notice that your colleagues are, perhaps, or friends or whoever, first of all, again, the bigger sign is when you know someone and you get to know them, what are they like? What makes them tick? What are they like on a day-to-day basis? Because when they deviate from that, that's usually a massive indicator that something is happening and it's worth checking it. So that's the first and foremost. But then if you notice other things, again, not a bad day, bad week, but in a 2-week period, this pattern is happening quite a bit. Like they're losing, they can't seem to concentrate. They're struggling to focus on things. Maybe you've had a conversation with them and they just simply didn't get it, but it was a very simple thing that you were explaining. Maybe they're struggling with their memory. Like they just seem to be forgetting those extra few things that is especially unusual for them. It might be if they're struggling to make decisions where that they've been able to make these levels of decisions, or maybe they're putting off challenging work. Other things are as well is if they go completely off the radar, ask yourself, why is that happening? And, and be curious about it and check in is the best way that you can actually look out for people.
So what if someone we're working with or a friend says they don't want to get help, or they keep saying they're okay when they're not? What could I do to help them?
I'm not going to hide the fact that, let's be honest, when you've seen someone like that and you can see that they're breaking down, they're clearly not okay, but they're like, yes, I'm fine. Every time you ask them, I'm fine. It can be quite frustrating to watch because you can clearly see that they're not okay. But you know what? If they, we all have the right to be able to judge for ourselves what we need. So, what you need to do in that scenario is be patient. Let them know that if they aren't okay, your doors are open, or they can go and speak to someone else if they don't want to speak to you. But just being patient, really. The one thing you can't do is force them into, getting help, taking them to the doctors or anything like that. Because if they're over 18 and they have capacity to make that decision for themselves, you can't do that unless it's an emergency.
Okay. And when we talk about mental health, we also need to talk about suicide too. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and also think about how we can help?
Okay, yeah. Just want to kind of we didn't think that, Brian. That's absolutely okay. It was just interesting to get your thoughts. In terms of suicide, see, this is one where people really struggle because, when you think about suicide, what is it that we're really thinking about? We're thinking about loss of life. That feels like such a big thing. But sadly, it's also so common, and we do need to kind of think about it. Like, we know that it's one of the biggest killers for people within 24 and 39, and one of the biggest killers of men, to be honest. And it's because, and just to kind of clarify, often people think it's because people want to take their life. Actually, more often than not, it's people want to stop their pain and they don't feel or know about or think about any other option. Like, they've probably thought about everything else. Pain doesn't go away. And what they want to do is just end that pain. So suicide is a thing that we do need to kind of think about, because chances are you won't even see the signs. You won't realize if someone is not okay or if they're having those thoughts or not. The only way to really know is to ask that question. But when do you ask that question? I know this is a lot to ask, and but it is something for you to think about, that when you notice that someone isn't okay and you're having a conversation and they might describe, like, maybe they're struggling to sleep and they feel really anxious, maybe they're feeling on edge or overwhelmed, especially if there are money worries and they can't, they're struggling to put food on the table and stuff like that. Ask the only way to do it is you have to ask that question. Hey, I just want to check in, like, are you having thoughts or have you had thoughts of taking your life? And now I know that you're probably thinking, I would never ask that question because, what if I put that idea in their head? What if I distress them? But the reality is can you really distress someone who's already distressed? Like, seriously, what are you going to say that's going to make it so much worse? But also, what can you say that will make their life better either? That doesn't exist at all. But what is quite powerful in this space is when you ask that question, and I'm not going to hide the fact that it doesn't matter how much training you get, it doesn't matter how experienced you are, it's still quite a difficult question to ask. So you will always feel uncomfortable, but you have to accept that uncomfortability and park it so that you're open to this person. Look, I've asked you that question. They then choose, do they say yes or no? They might say, no, I'm not having those thoughts. And then you kind of like move on from that. Or they might say yes. Now, this might be quite frightening for people. It's like, well, what do I do with that information? And honestly, unless it's an emergency situation where you would obviously call 999 straight away, this would be a chance to, I'm just going to park whatever I'm thinking, not say things like, oh, that's a stupid thing to do or anything like that. No judgment, just basically, but I'm also not going to skirt around the issue. What's it like for you? When do those thoughts come up for you? And what do you do when those thoughts come up? Do you have someone that you can talk to when those thoughts come up? And just making that space. When you make that space for someone and they're able to share that with you, that's really powerful because essentially it's communicating like, you know what, I feel quite validated. And it is, I'm not saying it's okay or not okay, but it's okay that these thoughts are coming up, like coming to me, and this person isn't going to judge me, but I can have this conversation. It gives them a chance to air what's going on in their head. But it is, like I said, one of those things that it's also to do with how okay you feel in being able to ask that question. And I guess I'm just going to say it again. You're never going to feel comfortable, but it is the most powerful thing you can do is to just ask that question.
Yeah. I agree. Brian's just saying one thing that was said to him when he was at rock bottom was suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And that really resonated with him. I think that's the thing. If you're just wanting to get away from how you feel, you're not necessarily wanting to end your life, and that you need to think about that this is permanent and it is a permanent decision that's going to end your life. So how do we go about looking after ourselves? What can help, Runa?
So, the thing first of all, I always get very, I don't know what the word to describe is. I always wonder about this question, to be honest, because it's almost like we need to know what to do, to be fair. But the reality is, what to do in yourself. You know what works for you and what doesn't. I definitely don't want to be part of the army that tells you do this, do that, and do that, because that will make you well. And to be honest, if we talked about it, you probably already know. The question isn't a knowledge gap. It's more about, do you apply it? Now, honestly, the things that you can do to look after yourself is, first of all, think about what's important to you and spend time like kind of doing that. Like, for example, if you feel quite isolated, maybe look to connect with other people, connect with friends, family, go out, meet up more if you get a chance, rather than just consistently and constantly working, and I know you might feel like, well, this workload is getting higher and higher and I need the time to be able to go and do it. But actually, taking time out is so important, and it's the little things. Often people think it's the big things you have to do, like I have to go away for a holiday to the Bahamas. Great if you can, but that's not something that people can do, to be fair. But little things like walking the dog, watching Netflix. If you're constantly around people, finding time for yourself, where you're just doing the basic things. It might be going to meet up with a mate and just laughing so hard that you wet yourself. It's these little things that kind of make our world go round. And then, of course, the basics. I know people keep harping on and on about it, but exercise is such a key thing. And, sometimes you don't feel okay to do it. And so I'm not talking about, higher intensity stuff, but just being able to go for a walk, just to move a little bit. Now, chances are that you probably already do this in the trade that you're in. You are moving around a lot. So you probably have that covered, to be fair. So maybe think about what other things you can do that are more about your pleasure and distraction rather than work-focused, tension-focused. is it okay if I tell you about a tool that we have in mind called a wellness action plan?
Yes, please do.
I have to admit, it saved my life, to be honest, because when I was struggling with my mental health 5 years ago, and I had quite a big breakdown, to be fair, you know, it's taken me. I still don't feel like I'm up there. Every time I think, I get cocky and I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. Just hits me around the corner. And so the wellness action plan was part of my recovery thing. Now, it's a tool, it's completely free. Obviously, we can send the link out to you after this, that you can download. There's a working from home, you know, remote working, and you'll find guidance for the kind of work that you do, basically. And it's 10 questions that gets you to think about, you know, what keeps you well at work. But I would expand on that and think, well, what keeps me well generally? It gets you to think about what your early warning signs are. Like for me, my memory is definitely the first warning sign. And it's usually something random, like I just forget this one extra thing where I go into a room and I'm like, why am I here? You know, and that's a tangible thing that I know I'm going down a rabbit hole. So I need to get on top of it. How does mental health problems, if I'm struggling with my mental health, how does it affect my day-to-day? What does that look like? You know, and what steps can my colleagues or my bosses take to support me? And you also get to think about what steps you can kind of take. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, the first few that you might do, and this is why we recommend that the more you become self-aware, the more you update this. So it's like a Netflix membership, you know, like after 2 months, you watch Netflix is like, oh, we recommend you watch this film. And you're like, yeah, I would hate that film. And then you one day watch it and you're like, oh my gosh, that was like the best film ever. It's because Netflix has really gotten to know you. This is a manual version of that. So I would recommend updating it every month, but I know that's kind of intense. Update it every quarter. First few are going to be pedestrian. You're going to put things that you feel like you should do, like exercise makes me feel good or stuff like that. You know, I love running. I don't love running. I hate running. So by the fourth or fifth one, I'd realized actually I hated running, but I did appreciate being completely alone because I was always around people and I like my times alone. It just helps me to process my thoughts. But now it's got to a point where it's so sophisticated. Like when I struggle with anxiety, I struggle with anxiety, but the way it manifests is paranoia. So I have this voice in my head that will say things like, oh, you're an idiot and your boss hates you and all of that kind of stuff. And so what I've put on my wellness action plan is when that voice comes up and it tells you these things, it's a liar. Do not believe it, to the point that I even go to my boss and say, is that what you think of me? To just challenge that voice, if nothing else. What I'm trying to say is that I've personalized it so much that it's something that I can really fall on, because, you know, when you start to struggle, even if it's not a mental health problem, even if it's something like burnout, honestly, the space in your head diminishes and it's overwhelming, so overwhelming. So to have something on paper, even if you don't do anything about it, you understand what's happening to you and the fact that you've been hijacked and what you can do about it in the most comfortable and accessible way. So definitely we'll send that link, Vicky. You know, definitely do have a look at it. And don't be put off by the fact that it just looks like a form that you have to fill in and stuff. You know, it is a general thing that has to go to a really wide audience. But, you know, look at it from a point of view that this is your investment. I'm going to get to know myself and get to know what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And I'm going to update this. And this is something that I can kind of fall back on. And actually, when you dig down, one of the hardest things about doing or challenging things about the wellness action plan is you having to be honest with yourself about this is how it lands for me, like not ignoring those signs, but paying attention to those signs. So just putting that out there, but I would definitely recommend doing the wellness action plan.
Yeah, Vicky says she's always found writing things down to almost get them out of your head, and seeing black and white really helps. Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's a great idea to put things on paper, and then you can read what you think and help challenge what you're thinking as well. And like you say, it because it's out of your head, then your head is free to do other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you do you have the link, Runa, that we can type in here now or not?
Well, I can certainly get it for you. So just give me 1 second. No to be honest, if you just type in wellness action plans mind in Google, it will bring it up. But I'm just going to get the link up for you.
Yeah, because if we can put it in the chat, then anybody that's listening now that would like to have a look at it, great. And people that will be watching later when they return from work and watching this on catch up, it'll be great to have that there for them as well. Brian agrees. He says you can't beat a list. So there's that link there for you. If you click on there, and you'll be able to download that wellness action plan and adapt it so that it suits your personal needs. And don't forget, as Runa says, keep updating it so that it becomes a valuable tool for you. I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for your comments today and for really getting involved in this session and making it so interactive. And Runa, thank you so much for all the help and advice you've given us. You've been a brilliant, amazing guest on the show, and I've really enjoyed having you take part. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Paula, and everybody.
Thanks, everyone. We have got other sessions today. We're back live at 1 o'clock, and we have a session tonight at 7 o'clock as well. So if you take a look on our website, trade-decorator.co.uk, and all the links are there for the sessions today and also right through till next Friday. And if you do want to watch this again or any of the other sessions you've missed, then that you can download those links and watch the replays of the sessions. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thanks, Runa.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.